Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. And today we're discussing how dating is different above 30. I'll say even specifically 35, as opposed to dating when you're, say, in your 20s. And we're gonna get into this and break this down because I see that this is a topic that comes up a lot, especially inside the dating world, especially in a lot of speaking points where people or in any kind of content, any kind of media where people talk on these kind of discussions, and they don't really say specifically or talk about the differences, but you see different people talking about dating from different ages, and they're thinking that it's the same, even though you could have a group of people talking about it who are maybe in their late 30s or maybe early 40s, having the same discussion that a few people are talking about from, having that same discussion in their 20s. And even though they talk like it's the same discussion, it's not. And a lot of people aren't aware that it's not, from both different sides, from the perspective of a man and perspective of a woman. So I just wanted to break that down and go into that because I think it's really interesting that it's never really addressed, sometime in a subtle way, but it's never really addressed like that. Generally speaking, for one side of it in their 20s, it's very carefree, and on another side, it's not. And then as time goes on, for one side, that kind of switches and it becomes more carefree for one and less carefree for the other. So, and generally speaking, you guys already know, it's usually a different dynamic between men and women and how that goes. So we're going to kind of break that down here. Pretty much it starts jumping into who and how, you select, and the idea that you actually have time for mistakes, and at what phase or what group for what phase feels like they do have those time for mistakes, or how they do their selecting. So generally, just breaking down and jumping right into it, in your 20s, we're just going to go side to side with different points for different groups. For women and for men, and how we're going to do this for the 20s, and then we're going to do this for the 35 plus. And then you're going to kind of really see how those differences are. For those who don't know the differences, most people see it. But like I said before, a lot of people don't talk about it. And I think it's a big deal because you have a lot more of these dating spaces now, or these talk, if you want to call them talk shows, but they're almost like podcasts. We'll have a group of people, like a panel of people, and they're having these talking points. So if you want to call them podcasts, dating podcasts, we'll call them that for a simple name. And you have a lot of talking points, but like I said, a lot of people don't differentiate the difference in age. And I think it becomes a very sensitive topic that people just don't speak on it, so they talk in general. But when you're in your 20s, one thing when it comes from women is they select off of more of a superficial and surface level, because it's like, how trendy is that guy? What's the vibe? Is he attractive, or whatever the case is? And even though that is looks are always going to be a criteria for men, but for the most part, and first I want to get this out of the picture too, because a lot of people are going to say this if they end up viewing this and commenting on it. When I speak from the men, I'm not talking about the small percentage that are the player types. There's not a large percent of that. And I go over this, and I've spoken on this point many times before, and a lot of people always think that that's the representative of the majority of men. That's actually a very small percentage of men. The only thing, and I'm just going to say this to break that down, if you have a player type and there's 20% of that or that type, in my studies, I've come down to about 20% of that type. They get a bunch of women, they attract a bunch of women, so they're always playing with a bunch of different women. That is what it is. We're not going to go into whether that's good or bad or what it is or whatever the case is right now. My point is, if 20% of men have like 5 different women, we'll say, just for the sake of numbers, 3 to 5 different women, then if there are equal men as to women inside the world, roughly speaking, not exactly, then if 20% of men have 5 women, that means they have all the women. That means 80% of men don't. We all know that generally that sounds about right to people who've seen those kind of men, because women even agree the same thing, whether they're going to say it or not, because most of the time they always say all men are cheaters. Most men are not cheaters. It's just that if you've been with a guy who has multiple women, you're all occupying the same space. So anyway, jumping back into the point, women are very selective at 20 years old, selective off of superficial surface things. Men generally are selective of what they can get. Whatever they can get, their taste adapts to what they're even able to have. And so that generally becomes a large search criteria for them in their 20s. For women in their 20s, they believe they have time to waste. Now, this is something that is portrayed to them a lot. And I did a video on this previously where it's always said, like, you have time to waste, you have a play phase. And that is the mindset of women in that phase. I've got time to waste, because generally, for the most part, they're going to be attractive from 20 all the way to 30, and that's not a problem. And they're young enough below 30 that men will still desire them for the purpose of building a family with, because they know that that's still within the realm of you can have a family, you can still readily be fertile, and it's not a problem. On the other side, men are in build mode at that point. So they're not thinking play phase because they're in build mode. Why? Because, and I spoke about this before also in a previous video, they have to build anyway, because often most men, and I'm not referring to the player type men again, I have to always reiterate that, they have to build themselves up to attract a mate. So they're automatically going to be in build phase regardless, because that's the only way they're going to be able to attract someone, let alone build a family. So they're killing two birds with one stone. They're building in the build phase so they'll be able to support a family when they have one, but they're also in the build phase so they can even attract a mate in the first place. Thirdly, I should say, for women in their 20s, they are highly selective. So even though they're in that play phase, they're in this kind of whatever, they're very highly selective on who they are selecting that they're going to choose. At that point, they almost need the person to be the top of the top of the top, not minding or caring the fact that when you choose someone like that, there's a lot of competition for that. And it, but nonetheless, they still have a very, very highly selective and very much picky about who they're selecting. Men, on the other hand, in their 20s are very non-selective. And like I said before, very adaptive. If there's a type of woman they can get, whether it's a level of looks, whether it's a level of like whatever it is, maybe a personality, maybe it's a body shape, maybe it's the way they dress, whatever it is that they're able to get, they adapt to that and they just try to make it work as best as they can. So you can see there's the big opposite in the way both are tackling dating in their 20s. Now, when we go to the 35 plus area, it changes. And this is a story as old as time, but I like to break down the points of what each one is doing. So that way it brings to light that if anybody, male or female, looks at this video, they're going to say, okay, I understand what the other side is thinking, if you didn't know what the other side is thinking. So when it comes to being 35 and up, women select off necessity now, because now there's no more playtime. They're trying to build a family now. I'm not going to go into the point whether this is wrong or right, or they should have been building or they shouldn't have been building, but just what is. And at that point, they're selecting off necessity now. There's a time frame, there's a clock, there's sometimes family pressure of, hey, when are you going to have kids? When are you going to build a family if they haven't done that yet? And so there's selection off a necessity. Or sometimes they already had kids, but now they broke up with whoever they're with. They're trying to now find someone to fill this space. And it's now out of necessity because they know that they're running lower on time in terms of building that family dynamic with somebody and being maybe to produce more kids. And that becomes a big aspect as well, because one of the big points, and I mentioned this in a previous video as well, one of the major aspects that makes men even select a woman in the first place is their ability to have kids. That plays a big role in terms of a guy desiring to even want to start something with a woman. So that clock is still there, even if you already had kids, because it's the part of the main thing that's going to make you keep the next guy. If a guy can't have kids with you, but you already have kids, and you miss that window to where you can have more kids, you probably close yourself out to the men in this age range even selecting you. Now, on the other side, for men, they select off desire at this point, no longer adaptive, but they're selecting off desire now. They're now going, okay, what do I want? This is my taste. That's what I want now. It's no longer just what's available to me, but they've already got to a place where they built themselves up. And now they're going to select more on what they want. So now things kind of change. Back to the women, they are less selective now because, like I just previously mentioned, now things are based off necessity. They are less selective in the way that they choose. Men, on the other hand, now are highly selective. So what does that mean now? Now it's not just a matter of them going after what they desire. Now they're very picky on even that. It's no longer now like where before I said they might adapt their taste from maybe a certain body shape, maybe a certain clothing style, maybe a certain personality. Now they'll say, well, I want this type of personality. I want them to have this type of body style, and I want them maybe to dress this kind of way. When I say dress, I mean, maybe people would adapt it because they wanted someone who dressed in a way that was like over the top or whatever the case is, because they were like, I could have that. Now they're highly selective. So not only do they know what they want, but even amongst what they want, they're even more picky now to say it's got to be even a higher level of the type I want. As far as women, now jumping back to women, they're in settle down mode at this point because, like I said before, as you get later on in life, it's a different ball game. So they're more in the mindset of, I want to settle down. I'm ready to slow down now. And a part of that also is because the selection ability is not there anymore. But on the flip side of it, men are in the retire from build phase mode. And what I mean by that is, like I said before, a man has to build regardless, whether it's to attract a person, but they also have to build regardless in their life, to be prepared for a family, as well as build to attract a mate. So even when they are 35 plus, whether they had somebody, or they never had somebody, or like not never had somebody, but whether they had kids or they didn't have kids, they were still in a build phase the whole time, and there's a burnout to that. And they're hitting a phase where they're like, I'm burned out from building, regardless of that nobody was here to accept me building. The point is, it took work and I'm burned out from it. So they get to a phase now where they're not so much looking to settle down at that point if they haven't already settled down and they're back into the single world, or if they've remained in that single world for a long time, because it actually takes work to jumpstart a family situation, either for the first time or again. So now that they're in this kind of retired phase of building, it's like, I don't want to do that anymore. It's taxing on the body and the mind to stay in that phase. A lot of people don't realize that, but it is. So a lot of times when men reach a point of, like, say 40 years old, 45 years old, 50 years old, they're in that phase where even if they're still working, they're kind of in a more relaxed stage of building. They don't want to build anymore. They don't want to be maybe saving as much money. They want to start enjoying their money. They want to start doing this and that. And to now start creating a family would require burning a lot of those resources, which means they have to go back into a build phase when they're already on the downward slope of running to end the build phase. Going back to women, another point for them is they are in a rushed mentality. This goes back to the whole necessity thing, but more in a deeper vein, it's the rush mentality means when they meet somebody, it's not just, now I got to be in a space where I'm trying to find somebody. It's in that process in itself, more specifically, as you're dating someone, you're almost like some of the first questions. Hey, listen, are you looking for something serious? Are you looking for kids? Are you looking to blah, blah? And where back in the 20s, they wouldn't have posed those questions as deeply or right away. Now, within the first, maybe like right away from meeting someone to within the first couple of like months, maybe like month or two of meeting them, it's, I got to know where your headspace is at because I need these things right away. On the contrast for the man, if he's already had kids in this situation, like say he's already has kids, family is now optional. So there is no rush mentality at all. So maybe he would want to have more kids, but it doesn't matter because he already has kids and he's not in a rush mentality. Now, for a woman, if she already has kids, nonetheless, the issue with this becomes the thing that's going to allow her to lock a guy down, like I said before, is the ability to have kids. We're going to get into that next point in a moment. First, let's jump over to the next point for the women is they often want to connect with a guy past the age of kids. So sometimes 45 years old or up, they still say, well, I'm looking for a relationship. I want to connect with someone. And Where this becomes an issue, there's nothing wrong with that in itself. But when you look at the contrast for men at, 35 and up, especially when you start getting to the 45 range, 50 range, kids are the drive for why men want to build with a woman. Once a woman is no longer capable of having kids, most men up in that age range, like I said, a little bit more in the older range past 35, but maybe about 45 or 50, they get into a space where they're like, if you can't have kids, I don't want to just have a woman here that I'm giving my resources to that I can't get anything from you. Part of their natural design to want to give to a female is because she is the bearer of his kids. So taking care of her is essentially taking care of the kids, because the idea is if I provide for her and make sure she has got an easy home, she's able to now take her energy and give that to the kids. When there's no kids involved, now it's just giving away your resources to someone. So most of the time, men will have the perspective of, okay, I can date you, we can chill, this and that, but I don't necessarily want to build with you anymore or with you at all as a new suitor. And I don't want to necessarily give my resources to someone like that unless you're capable of having kids. So this becomes a big contrast to the women who want to lock down a guy and they're past the prime of being able to have kids. It creates that dilemma in that age range. So taking a look, like I said, of the 20s versus 35 and up, you can see those distinct differences really change the layout, where when you have all these kind of, for like I said, lack of a better word, we're going to call them talk shows or podcasts in terms of dating, you're going to see this discrepancy, because on all stages, whether you're in the 20s or you're in the 35 and up, most are not on the same page in terms of what they're looking for, nor do they have the understanding of that sacrifice. In the 20s, you're supposed to just both look for the same thing, get with each other, and then in the 30s and 35 and up, you guys are already together, so you no longer have to go into that phase of the man doesn't have to start rebuilding and the woman already has her person. So right now we're in a space where those things are not happening. Like, it's different. The dating world is definitely a different landscape, but I just wanted to give the perspective on those differences, so that way, if there is anybody who's in question of how things work, they understand those differences from a woman's perspective and a man's perspective in terms of what they're looking for in the stages of 20s versus like late 30s, maybe 40s and up. So put your comments down below. And as always, you guys, like, share, comment, subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next video.